The director of the CIA says that the U.S. has paused intelligence sharing and weapons shipments to Ukraine. This comes after President Trump questioned whether Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy was committed to peace. The two leaders had a contentious meeting at the White House last week, now seen around the world. Ukraine relies on intelligence from the U.S. to help plan its offensive and defensive operations against Russia.
Joining us now to discuss the changes is Euro-Atlantic security consultant Natalie Melnyczuk. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So from a security perspective, break down what's significant about Trump's recent statements to our allies about the war.
Well, the last 14 days have been just unforeseeable, truly. We knew that President Trump had a likeness for President Putin, an autocratic dictator who tends to wage war frequently in his neighborhood. And the war with Ukraine has been going on now for 11 years. The United States and NATO allies have been backing Ukraine militarily and with assistance. Of course, no boots on the ground, but they have stood steadfast with this democratic European wannabe NATO member country. They are like us. Their values are democratic. They have a very similar constitution. They have a very similar structure of government. And we are close friends and allies. However, in the last 14 days, the new presidential administration from the United States has been signaling repeatedly that it may not be as willing to support NATO allies and Ukraine in their defense against the autocratic invasion of Russia. It started in Munich 2 weeks ago. It continued in Brussels, and we have had everyone from the Secretary of Defense to the Vice President to President Trump himself iterate and reiterate that Ukraine is the one who's going to need to concede a lot of their demands in order to bring peace to Ukraine. Ukraine, the one attacked, rather than the aggressor Russia. And the big change in policy here is we're not hearing anything about what Russia needs to concede. And so we might be witnessing a might versus right preferencing where the United States has always believed in the rule of law. We are now looking at possibly rewarding Putin for his illegal aggression against Ukraine. And that is shocking.
Yeah, a lot of this has been so shocking for so many people. Actually leads me to the next question that I was going to ask you, because like you mentioned, we saw J.D. Vance and President Trump talking to President Zelenskyy about what he needs to do and how he needs to handle things. What does Russia need to do? How is Russia in this conversation and in this equation?
We have not heard any demands on the part of the U.S. government towards President Putin. And that is what is putting everybody into a state of confusion. Our European allies are responding by gathering together under the United Kingdom's lead. Prime Minister Keir Starmer and President Macron of France, more or less acting as the spokesperson for the EU, have been rallying to Ukraine's side. They continue to believe in protecting their democratic neighbor, its territorial integrity and sovereignty, because, believe it or not, whatever happens to Ukraine, that's what's in store for Europe. If Ukraine cannot stand against Russia, it also means Europe itself is threatened, not just Ukraine. And President Putin has been working for more than 3 years to turn this into a war of his autocratic country against the West, against the international legal order, and yes, against the United States. And that may indeed be what we see if the United States does not continue backing Ukraine, or at least provide legitimate security guarantees and a backstop to our European allies who are willing to put boots on the ground in Ukraine if there were a just and sustainable peace reached. But peace at any price is not what anybody in Europe wants. That would be throwing Ukraine, democracy, and the international legal order under the bus. And that's what the U.S. has always stood for and led the past 80 years. So this is truly a very delicate moment.
And a quick thought before we wrap up. Zelenskyy has been front and center in the media and the headlines in front of cameras, especially in the last week. But we really haven't heard anything from Putin, have we? Do we know what he's thinking, what he's saying about this deal behind closed doors?
He has not been speaking publicly, but all his representatives and spokespeople have made it very clear, as well as former Russian President Medvedev. They have all said they're very pleased to see that the vision of U.S. foreign policy is now in alignment with Russian foreign policy. And on that note, at the United Nations just 1 week ago, the United States unthinkably voted against a resolution at the UN regarding Russia's war on Ukraine, siding with Russia, Iran, North Korea, and Belarus, all autocracies. And thereby, they were voting against their democratic allies.
Well, we'll continue to follow this very closely. Natalie Melnyczuk, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much.